Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
The Shelby County School System tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. I'm joined tonight by Dorsey Hobson, Superintendent of the Shelby County School System. Thanks for being here again.
Glad to be with you.
Along with Chris Caldwell, Chairman of the Shelby County School Board. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And Bill Dries, Senior Reporter with the Memphis Daily News. So, Dorsey, I think it was either in a public meeting or in talking to Bill, but I read it in Bill's article. You talked about most times this time of year, you are pretty depressed. Going into budget season, you both have had some huge gaps. This year you said I don't know if you said you're not depressed about the financial situation, but less so. Why are you a little more optimistic right now or about the budget situation for the schools?
Well, this has been the first year since the merger that we actually are in a position to do some strategic investments in our schools. I think that because of some of the great work our board has done over the past few years, some really smart planning by our CFO, and consistently identifying efficiencies over the past few years, we're in a much better state with regard to the budget. I will say, though, that we still believe we're woefully underfunded by the state. There was a report that came out a few weeks ago, and it literally said that Shelby County Schools has the highest poverty index of any school district in the country, and it compared it to the state funding, and it just shows that while we're getting smarter and doing more with less, we still have significant funding challenges from our state. But even having said that, very glad to be able to present a budget that invests about $50 million in schools, and just look forward to the continued discussion.
When you say invest, the $50 million, that investment in people, investment in physical plant, investment in what?
In people. So, we are included about $11 million, almost $11 million in teacher raises, a lot of school-based personnel, interventionist teachers, behavioral specialists, more guidance counselors. We consistently hear from schools that one of the things that would be helpful would be just having more boots on the ground in a strategic way to help drive student achievement. So we've invested, or we've proposed a lot of investments really at the school level to help with the academic lift we're trying to achieve. And
Chris, you've been on the board how long?
5 years.
5 years. And so for your point of view, from a board point of view, do you share the cautious optimism that Dorsey has?
Yes, to some degree. To his point, I think we have finally stabilized the situation, but we were woefully underfunded when we merged. And then we had to make drastic cuts. So that's a hard thing to do because you can't get rid of all your overhead costs at the same time you're losing students and you're losing funding. But as he said, we were woefully underfunded to start with. So now we're getting to a point where we can actually replace some things that got taken out of the system because of the merger and demerger. But we still really have a long way to go before all the students have the kind of resources they really need.
And before I go to Bill, one more. The cuts in part came from a loss of students. Is that correct? And that state money follows the student. So you had a whole situation. There were a lot of dynamics with merger, demerger, but you had one dynamic was kids going into ASD charter schools or ASD schools, people leaving the system. Is that the not flood, but the outflow of students, has that stabilized?
Yes, I think that this last year we added about 1,000 students.
Added.
Yes.
Yeah.
But you had a moratorium on ASD schools. So to your point, yes, it was driven by a decrease in enrollment, but the main driving force in the loss of enrollment was the proliferation of charter schools and the formation of the ASD. And I'd just add that a lot of states that have used the ASD model, where they bring in a state-operated district, they hold the current district harmless financially. But the state didn't decide to do that, so that made everything worse.
Yeah.
But I still say, Eric, and I agree with everything what Chris said, but I still don't want to lose sight of the optimism and excitement we have with being able to actually not focus on cut this year, but rather on being able to strategically invest in schools. And I think particularly the teacher raises and the school-based personnel that we're going to be adding is still exciting. Again, as Chris said, and as I said, we got a long way to go. But unlike the previous years where I'm sitting here saying we got to cut this, we got to cut that, we got to cut this, and we're worried about this, we're worried about that, at least we're stable and can begin to be thinking more strategically.
All right, Bill.
So you've made a decision as part of that, in the spirit of that you're not going to lay off teachers. That's going to be your recommendation to the school board, that there be no layoffs of teachers, and at the same time you're probably going to lose about 900 students. You think that's best case scenario without passage of a voucher bill, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. So walk me through what happens if you lose those students and you keep those teachers. What do those teachers do?
So a couple things. I think that one of the things we've learned is that in this highly competitive environment for teachers, when you have a destabilized workforce where teachers show up and then they get accessed and then they're scrambling for jobs, it's just not good for kids. But we know there's constant turnover. We hire probably 1,200 teachers every summer anyway. So just the natural flow of things, there'll be openings. But the way we're thinking about it this year, Bill, is we're saying, all right, well, if we know you're going to be accessed or we're projecting a decline in enrollment this year, sometimes it doesn't happen, and then you have to go out and hire a teacher anyway. So we're going to carry those teachers in those roles until the 20-day count in August. If the position goes away because there really is a loss in enrollment, then we will look to place those teachers as interventionist teachers, one of the things that we've asked for investments on, and then just place them in vacancies in an interim role until such time as they can find a permanent position. But I think, with the national teacher shortage, and I think we have around 60 or so vacancies now. Prior to December, we had around 150 vacancies. So we know there's always a need, and it doesn't make sense to take an effective teacher, put them out there in kind of wonderland, have them scrambling. You may actually lose them to a municipality or ASD or somewhere like that, and then you have vacancies. So that just doesn't make sense, and we just think that the math will just ultimately add up. And if not, we think investing in a stable workforce and making sure our teachers are focused on teaching as opposed to, am I going to have a job, is going to be best for kids.
How many, before we go back to Bill, how many teachers total, give or take? In the schools?
About 6,000 plus.
Okay, and about 1,200 turnover every year?
Every year, yes.
Gotcha. Okay, Bill.
Chris, how is the school board on that idea of no layoffs?
I don't know that we've taken a position as a board, but I will tell you as one school board member that I think it's a good move. I think it does bring stability, and to the points that the superintendent brought up about, a teacher being able to plan for the next year and not getting a phone call to go to another district. I think that, I think teachers have been under siege for the last few years, and they've caught the brunt of all this reform work. So anything that makes the morale of teachers better, anything that helps them feel like they have a career and not just a job that's from one year to the next, I'm all for that. Mm-hmm. And I would think that a lot of my colleagues share that opinion.
Okay. Let's talk about ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act, the federal legislation that was passed by Congress. As I understand it, does that mean that the Achievement School District here will not be adding any new schools, and that Shelby County Schools gets first crack, so to speak, at the turnaround models?
So they have proposed a matrix rather, and it basically says if you are a school and you are on the list for the very first time, then the Shelby County Schools will get the first crack at it. They will only intervene if a school has been on the list twice. And we think that certainly helps us plan better, because I think we have a pretty good track record of if a school gets on and they get the intense treatment and support that they need, we've shown in iZone we've been able to move schools. So I think that is a huge shift. And it also brings clarity, because what used to happen was they run the list and they can pick any school that they want, really with no guidelines. So I think just knowing kind of the universal schools that are eligible to be for the state intervention will be helpful in terms of planning purposes.
And just to clarify a couple of things, we'll go back to Bill. ESSA, which is a federal program, is that correct? Was that was passed? Is that implemented by the federal Department of Education, or by the local or the state?
So they push basically, in broad terms, they push it down, and the state
Okay.
is responsible for helping with the implementation.
Okay, and is there any chance that changes with the new administration? I mean, or do you just assume it won't? I mean,
Well, I think we just assume it won't.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess anything's possible.
Yeah.
But I think they've been pretty clear. I think that the commissioner came out with something the other day and said, "Hey, we're staying the course." So,
and the iZone schools, for people who don't know, iZone was the Shelby County approach to bottom performing schools. ASD was mandated by the state. There was Chris Barbick, who was on the show, and the woman who the name escapes me, who's the superintendent now.
Malika.
Yeah.
Malika, thank you. And you all had some competition and different test scores, and there was that sort of era that we talked about of schools, students, schools going into the Achievement School District. The iZone, by some accounts, iZone schools that you've run have done better. But again, that's that turnaround model that you've focused on. Okay, we had a lot of names and a lot of programs that we all are very familiar with, but a lot of acronyms. So I want to make sure we stop for a
and
second.
I will say, we were proud of. Krista and I went to Nashville a few weeks ago and spent time with the Senate Education Committee and the House Education Committee, and really was able to share some good news regarding the iZone and some of the work we're doing. I think at the end of the day, we were encouraged by some of the responses and the reactions from some of the legislators.
And you bring up the legislature. At times, I think you all have felt, but people in Memphis have felt that the legislature has been on the attack, has been cutting funding, dictating things to the school system in Shelby County that were sort of drawn up on a whiteboard in Nashville and then had to be implemented without really thinking it all the way through. I think that's been a criticism of the legislature. Do you still see that the legislature, I'll ask you, Chris, that the legislature is on the attack in terms of Shelby County schools?
So I think attack may be too strong. I think one of the things that Dorsey and I tried to do, it's very interesting how Nashville works, and what we found is that a lot of the legislators were sort of caught in a time warp, in that they were still thinking when they thought about Shelby County schools. Now they were just thinking it was still Memphis City schools, and so what we were trying to do is get the accurate, up-to-date information that we're not in any way the same school district that when all this started. You had MCS on decline, you had the Race to the Top Act, and that's where the iZone was born, and I have to give Senator Norris credit for that. That was his suggestion. And then the ASD was the state's approach toward turnaround work. So I think a lot of them weren't really aware about the Vanderbilt study and how well the iZone has been doing. And really, that's one of the key pieces of Race to the Top, is to try to reach those schools. And we think we have a model we know we have a model that works. And one of the things that the superintendent and I did was to talk to legislators about the success we've had. And so if it's really about finding a model that works, we found one. So now we would just like them to invest in that. And we got some pretty optimistic remarks from them.
Yeah.
So Chris, you've expressed some real concerns over your 5 years on the school board about the relationship or the coexistence of the conventional schools, the iZone schools, and the Achievement School District. Does ESSA do anything to change those concerns that you have? Does it move it further down the road toward a resolution?
So, my understanding of ESSA is to get more of the decision making down to the state, and then the state to put it down, push it down to the local education authority. So, in the sense that decisions are made closer to the classroom, I think the closer those decisions are made to the classroom, the more effective they are and the less expensive they are. So it's sort of the peripheral stuff that throws a wrench in the works, and then also the key is how this stuff gets implemented. And so that's where the rubber meets the road. So a lot of it, you have to wait and see what comes out of Nashville. You know how often things change on bills where you think something is happening and they bring in a caption bill at the end of the session. So we really have to wait till this legislative session is over and see where where the dust settles and the chips fall, to know what we're dealing with. And then we'll, of course, like the superintendent of the administration has done a great job just reacting to that.
But by the same token, it seems as if with funding for priority schools, whether they're iZone or ASD, or if they're just in the bottom 5 to 10% and not in either program, some kind of general guarantee from the state that there's going to be funding for all of those schools. Are the iZone schools in a period of evolution as well in the midst of this, Dorsey?
Yeah, I think that I think several things there. So we have been told that ESSA will guarantee some amount of funding for all priority schools. Not quite sure exactly what that amount will be, but we obviously will adjust. And obviously the iZone schools continue to evolve. When we started the work, they were supposed to be in the iZone like the ASD for 5 years, and they'd be turned around, and then they essentially could go back without all the additional supports. Some of the schools that we have in the iZone that have been there 5 years would be fine without the additional support. Some continue to need supports. But what we don't want to do, Bill, is you have a school that has been neglected and struggling for a long time. You finally get on the right path and you start to lift yourselves out of the bottom, and then pull the rug out from under them with the funding. So we try to be thoughtful about it. Even though you're not, technically not in the bottom 5% anymore, we still want to continue with the supports that we know that work.
And you've talked about Tier 1 and Tier 2 schools, which are the two types of schools, I'll say, that are in the critical focus schools that you're devoting a lot of attention to in this budget. Tier 1 is bottom 5%, as I understand it.
Exactly.
Tier 2 are the schools that are bottom 10%.
Exactly. I think that to that point, we, every year, we talk about school closures, and I think our board was very thoughtful this time in saying, look, you can close schools, but at some point you begin to rip the hearts out of communities. And when the feedback is always, well, hey, we didn't know our school was in this bad a shape. You haven't given us any support in terms of helping us with enrollment. You haven't given us the kind of support in terms of turning schools around. So what we said this year was, before we take that critical step of recommending closure, let's make sure we support schools in the way that we know that they need to. And if they show improvement, and if they show an ability to garner more enrollment, then perhaps closure would not be on the table. So that's how we came up with the critical focus schools list. And I think there's about $5 million in the budget to support those schools. But we're clear, though. I mean, if the schools don't improve, or if enrollment continues to significantly decline, then an option, certainly on the table could be closure.
And so, with school closures, and we have about 10 minutes left in the show. With school closures, how many schools have been closed in the last 5 years?
22 schools
That are mothballed, essentially. Okay. And how many are on the list to definitely be closed in the next year or two?
So we don't have, we didn't make any recommendations around this year.
Okay, but you've got these ones that are on, essentially on notice.
Exactly.
About how many is that?
Yeah, I think it's.
Is it 10 or so, or
no, it's. Well, let me back up. We did make a couple of recommendations in terms of some consolidations and some new bills. We recommended consolidating ALC and Magnolia and building a new school, and then Goodlet and Knight Road. I mean, because also, in addition to closing schools, we want our students to have, state-of-the-art facilities, because I think at the end of the day, we have all this deferred maintenance. The data is undeniably clear that when you have a better learning environment, it just puts you on a better track for student achievement. So we did recommend consolidating, I think, 9 schools into 3. That process is ongoing. The board's already approved it. We're talking to the county commission. And then I think there are another 15 or 16 or so schools that are on the critical focus list.
And so it's an interesting dynamic. I mean, you've been on show a number of times, and other people have been on talking about school closures. Some people talk about school closures as if that was the answer, and that is the answer. You have these half-empty schools, close them, save the money, budget balanced. Now, you've closed a bunch. So were they right? I mean, was that the magic of fixing, quote unquote, the school system, was just close these half-empty schools?
I don't think so. I don't think we can close enough schools to get us in a position where we have enough resources.
Yeah.
So I think there are instances where it makes sense, but actually to save money, I don't know that that's always the best way to save money by closing the school, especially if you leave a gap in those neighborhoods because what we found is that you know, it's not the closing of the school that's the canary in the coal mine, it's the last miner out. Those communities have already been abandoned by the state, the county, and the city. So, and the natural decline, then you have, you know, migration of people that can move, that move. So, you know, it's really, like so many things in education, there are a lot of factors that have to be taken into consideration, and it's not so simple that this one thing is directly causes this.
Is it the role, Darcy, and see if I can frame this right, is that part of your mission as a school system, to keep a school open to help that neighborhood, above and beyond teaching the kids in that school?
No, I think that we obviously have to be, our number one priority has to be student achievement.
Okay.
And I think that there are several factors that directly impact student achievement when you close a school or choose not to close a school. Having said that, you know, we do realize that there are some unintended consequences for closing a school that directly impact student achievement. For example, we recommended closing a school earlier this year, Dunbar Elementary School. But then when you go out to the community and you hear about, you know, now my kid, this is a neighborhood school, they walk, now they have to be on a bus X amount of time, now these things happen, now this, and then it does impact student achievement. So it's not, you know, we're gonna be the neighborhood association, but we have to consider impact on communities when we make the decisions.
With 5 minutes left, let's switch back to the legislature. There is a voucher bill that I think Senator Kelsey from Germantown is pushing, and others are supportive. There's a voucher bill every year. This one, given I think the state budget situation, seems to have a little more legs to it. Your take, Chris, on voucher programs would be giving qualified, I think in this case, low income or a certain income level families a voucher to take that could be used at a private school, an approved private school. That money would come out of the school district and go into the hands of that private school. Fair description?
Right.
Your take on this bill?
So it depends on, I think there are 2 or 3 bills. Okay. So it depends on which one you're talking about. And again, it'll be the final bill that you know, that we'll be concerned about. But there's no data to show that the kids will be better served in a private school. And so I would hope that decisions are data-based and informed. You know, a more recent study out of New York, I think it has showed again that there's no evidence that that's an answer toward lifting kids in lower performing schools out.
But in general, people think of as private schools, I'm sure there's some people listening going, wait, no, private schools, the test scores and the college achievement and the college entrance is much, 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 much higher than public schools. Now, I'm just saying, I'm sure someone is saying that as they listen to you.
But if you take into account socioeconomic factors, the families that are involved in those private schools, just the experiences they have by the time they're in the 6th grade, compared to a kid that's in public school that's come from a broken home with maybe one parent that, you know, as we've pointed out, there are 40,000 students that live in households with less than a $10,000 income. How in the world can that child have the same experiences as somebody that's in a private school that's had access to other things outside of the school? So yes, there are some more supports in that school, but I think even, but then is the experience going to be the same? And again, it goes back to how is it going to be implemented? Right. And so I'm very pessimistic that it's going to be an answer.
Well, you've got a huge percentage of kids, just as one example, then I'll go to Bill, who get, 3 meals a day through the school system. And most private schools don't offer that kind of support, just to the whole point of support. And after school programs cost more money, they're not free, and so on and so forth. But just a couple minutes left. Bill, go to you.
We've talked a lot about school closing, and I think sometimes people think that these changes are exclusive to the schools in the school system that are within Memphis. That's not the case at all. You've been looking over several cycles in several different ways at North Shelby County. And one of the longer range plans you've got is to, I think it was initially to bring back a Woodstock High School. Now you're talking about a Woodstock possibly K through 12. Yeah. Where is your thinking at on that? That's still a few school years at least down the road.
Yeah, I think it's, if you've ever been out to Woodstock, I mean, the facility is just in bad shape. Then you have North Haven that's not that far, and their facility is not in great shape. And, you know, same thought process has to be considered. I mean, those schools are not just the physical plants, but the achievement level in those schools are low. And so they need additional supports as well. So the thinking is to Woodstock's been promised a new school for decades. And we think that given the population out there, given the fact that we lose some kids to Millington just because there's no other option that people are interested in, it just makes sense to have a K through 12 facility out there, new iZone, additional supports. But obviously we want to do a lot of community engagement because we haven't done a K through 12 school in a long time. So we initially said 6 through 12, but then some of the feedback was why not K through 12? So we'll be engaging the community over the next few months on that.
Okay. And Bolton High School, there's been some talk about that becoming what amounts to, I guess you would call it, an optional school that has an agricultural focus, agriculture and technology around agriculture on that. And the last I heard, Commissioner Reeves, who used to be a school board member, had, I think, a cost estimate of maybe $35,000 for a consultant to look at that.
Yes, so I think that Commissioner Reeves was actually going to use some of his county commission grants and fund it. And when they spoke with our optional schools coordinator and our academic folks and decided to hold off on that because we've got a plan that I think people will be interested in around the agricultural STEM program.
All right, we'll end it there. We're out of time. I'm sorry to cut you off. Thank you both for being here. Thank you, Bill. Thank you all for joining us. Join us again next week.